Power Breakfast on Citizen TV. Time to take a look at the headlines this morning. My name is Freddie Ndimuli. Let me just introduce my guest, but before that, yesterday, of course, on JKL, the main guest yesterday was none other than the CEO of IEBC, Ezra Chiloba. Even before I introduce my guest this morning, let's hear what he had to say in his final submission.
We're ready. Okay, this is my message to the Kenyan people. We went to an election on August 8th. The Commission, as the only institution mandated to run elections in this country, did its best. But the Supreme Court said otherwise. From where we sit, we think we've been given a second chance to be able not to just redeem ourselves, but to give the Kenyan people another chance to express themselves, and their will may be counted or may count for something at the end of the day. As a commission, we know a lot has been said, but we urge you not to give up. Don't give up on our democratization journey. Allow the commission to be able to prepare after learning a lot from the just concluded election. Allow the commission to prepare, and when that day comes, please show up at the polling station, knowing very well that this time round your vote will be protected to the level that the Supreme Court has determined. And that is our commitment to you, and that is the effort that we're investing into this particular process. So don't give up in our journey of democratization. Thank you very much.
Don't give up on this journey of democratization.
Yes.
Yes, allow me to repeat that again. Do not give up on our democratization journey. Ezra Chiloba, CEO IEBC, speaking last night on JKL. This morning, we're privileged to have Tia Galgalo, former woman representative of Isiolo County, as part of our panel. Karibu sana. It's a privilege to have you on the panel. Next to her, we do have Professor Jacqueline Odwol, nominated MP. Senator Kimani Wamatangi from Kiambu County, and Senator Agnes Zani, who is the Secretary General of ODM Party. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It is a privilege to have Senator Wamatangi. You look a bit intimidated. Things have changed.
Very intimidated.
I wouldn't be intimidated. I would only lament that today, Fred, you decided to disobey the two-third gender.
No. It is actually an honor to have more ladies on the panel. We rarely have such a high number of ladies on the panel.
The gender rule goes both ways. It's about gender.
And the men have really had their say
for a long time.
Yeah. So the biggest headline this morning, of course, discussions have to do with the preparations for the repeat presidential poll. Rogue poll officers to go in crackdown. Finally, IEBC, Chebukati follows through and promised to clean up the August debacle. To protect the integrity and sovereign will of the people, the Commission will make internal changes to our personnel and processes as we prepare for the poll. That's the IEBC chairperson, Wafula Chebukati. 5 returning officers face the sack. 14 others severely reprimanded of irregularities which resulted in the nullification of the presidential election last month. But is it enough? On the front page of the Standard, what IEBC told Raila team in key talks, agency hits it will not be possible to meet most of NASA's demands due to legal contracts and ongoing poll preparations. They've listed NASA's demands on the front page of the Standard, and IEBC's response to each of those. And it appears, yes, while on one hand IEBC has tried and to probably comply by punishing some of those people who may be deemed culpable for some of the irregularities and illegalities of the October 8th nullified election, IEBC admits it cannot meet some of those demands by NASA. We'll be getting to hear what Raila Odinga said yesterday with regard to that. We do have that story by Stephen Leto. But before that, quickly, this is where we are. Tia Galgalo, this is where we are. Less than 3 weeks. It's actually 20 days. Thank you, Dr. Agnes Zani, for reminding us that it's 20 days to the election. We still are not sure whether or not it will happen.
I think it should happen. Of course, preparation for election is not easy, especially with the timeline that we have. But I think the Electoral Commission is already assuring Kenyans that the elections will have to go on. Of course, many of the demands cannot be met. Sincerely, in 2 months, I'm sure if in the event that we would want to do overhaul of an Electoral Commission or electoral system or management, then it takes quite a long time. For me, I think this is a learning lesson. This is the first time that this is repeated, and I think they are trying to put in place minimum things that they can do as an institution, so that at least we'll have credible election.
Professor Odwald, minimum is not what you want. You want your 11, now 12 point. If you may add the mobile service provider Safaricom to that 12-point irreducible minimum. You want IEBC to comply with that. They've already said no, we cannot. That's a bit too much.
Fred, I think it's a bit unfortunate that in negotiation and in a context where we want to resolve conflict, we ignore that there would be fundamentals. I would say, having listened to Ezra Chiloba, that the key question would be, what are the lessons that the IEBC learned, and how can IEBC demonstrate in terms of what they have learned, which of those minimums they have addressed. I think we make it look complex, but I really believe it boils down to looking at justice as something that must be contextualized, and really just asking, let's talk. We would like to have elections in 20 days. We know there is an independent electoral commission. We also know there were concerns. I believe if we sat down soberly, remembering that justice is something that is defined in context, I believe that we would be able to have elections.
And Professor Odwald makes a lot of sense, Senator Matangi, that yes, if you sit down, probably some of these things that appear so difficult right now can be ironed out.
I think in follow-up to that last clip you played, and Chiloba says two very interesting things. First, that it is an opportunity for them not only to redeem themselves. A very interesting statement from the CEO. I mean, saying that that they require redemption. I wish he would be called back. He should have detailed that in better language, so that one would be able to understand, and Kenyans would understand to what extent and for which sins and crimes specifically was he referring to the redemption to. But
probably the ones itemized by the Supreme Court.
Well, I mean, I'm saying that in context because IEBC is the pivot that determines how these things, whether we are able to have an election that is credible, that's free, that's fair or not. And you see, then that last statement that he makes, that Kenyans don't give up on this journey of democratization. For us, as is obvious, Fred, we are not about to give up. I'm speaking as Kenyans. We're not about to give up. We are not even thinking about giving up. But it is important that IEBC realizes that they not only have a duty to obey that court order to carry out the elections on the 26th, but they owe it to the country to ensure that they have lived up to their constitutional mandate to organize and oversee a proper election. And so what I would say is that I think every time from now onwards, when they speak, IEBC, we must bring this right to their doorstep and tell them it is you.
Yes.
Now, it is them. As we are ready, of course, it will be interesting. I don't know whether my colleagues, my friends from this other side of NASA have changed their mind up to now, whether they still want to continue with the no election mantra or pursuit, which of course, as you know, Fred, they have not been able to explain to this country what they mean by there will be no election. But if what Chiloba is saying and what we are saying as Kenyans, and what they are proposing, that there will be no election, then can be contextualized. I think the majority of us, the majority of Kenyans, And I'm sitting in that committee that you saw yesterday, listening to the views of Kenyans on some of those amendments on the election laws. I can tell you probably 70% or 80% of the people, other than raising specific issues which, of course, can be listened to and dealt with, most of the people are not only ready, they are eager to go for the election.
Senator Agnes Zani, do you agree that most of Kenya is ready for this election?
I think most of Kenyans want to be able to cast their vote and for that vote to count. If they're going to cast that vote and that vote and it's not going to count, then it's completely futile. And that's why these reforms are very, very critical. And Fred, right from the beginning, IBC gave us a sense of how everything would work very, very well. For example, they had in place the 34As, the 34Bs, and the processing. When the results started streaming in, the first thing people asked is, where are these results coming from? And it would have been very, very simple. For example, to link each result to a specific polling station so people know and understand exactly what is going. Now, it's very interesting when IBC speaks like this, because you'll remember, Fred, prior to the elections, we had all these discussions about IBC, and if you'll remember, our colleagues from the other side kept saying IBC is an independent body. Let them do what they need to do. Let them do it without any sort of interference. Now, this is a process that includes all the Kenyans, because everybody really wants that fairness and credibility in the votes, and that they should be able to count. And many of these suggestions were made even then. And I think what Chiloba should be telling us now clearly is what went wrong in detail. Because the promises, I think, that have been made IBC have been made over and over and over again. IBC is the body that must and should conduct the elections, yes. But at the end of the day, they've made these promises. But when it comes for accountability, I'll tell you, Fred, I was at Bomas Center, and just before the results were announced, Chebukati himself had confirmed with all the political parties that are present that no results and no declaration would be made without all 34As and 34Bs being in there. Finally, that was actually done. We have 34As that we're not sure we can actually track right up to the polling station because they don't have the security features that are required, and we don't know whether anybody can just fill up a form and present it and say this is the form that was actually used. This is what we're saying. So when we're talking about the irreducible minimums, we're saying that these are very, very critical. Now, either we want to do it or we don't want to do it. What I feel, the sense I have, is that, for example, hadn't there been the level of push, hadn't there been the level of insistence, you know, IBC only responds when people have insisted and there's a sort of crisis. New laws are coming in now that people are rejecting because we want to address the situation. There was nothing wrong with what happened on the 8th. In terms of the process, most of the issues that are addressed by the new laws are purely administrative, and they should have already been done. What IBC needs to tell us now, and I think I had Cheloba addressing a bit of that, but we need to know very, very consciously, was it that they were not in control of the presiding officers, for example, you know, because finally we got these forms from those same presiding officers. Do they have the accurate numbers in them? Can we link that these results actually came from a particular polling station? Because the assertion is that these results were coming from various hotels very near the proximity of Nairobi. We want to be able to have those GPRS features linked to every KIM so that we know from this particular polling station, these are results. We want to have those standardized forms because they are important, so that each particular presiding officer and returning officer is given the right results. We want to have the media active. These are some of the irreducible minimums that we are putting. Let us make this a very open process. Let us make sure the media are there. Let us make sure the way I understand the way it was meant to be done. From 34A, you have a consolidation of very clear standardized forms, and it should be easy now because the candidates are fewer. Let everybody who is there, all the agents, look at these forms and be happy with them. Let them be taken to the talent center, which is the constituency. Let it be put together.
But my understanding is that the demands are even more than that, and some of them are even listed here, even beyond the forms. And we'll be listening to what Raila Odinga has to say about IBC's response, and if at all they're in agreement. Because yes, even the headlines seem to disagree to some extent. On the Daily Nation, yes, this is one of the demands, that those people found culpable within the IEBC should be made to leave. And yes, 5 returning officers face the sack. Probably not the list given by NASA, but at least some people are bearing the brunt or paying for their sins or of commission or omission. On the Standard, however, what IEBC told Raila team in key talks, and it lists some of the NASA's irreducible demands on one hand, and IEBC's response basically saying that we cannot meet for one reason or the other. So despite saying that NASA had softened its demands against the Electoral Commission, Raila Odinga has declared zero confidence in IEBC, and the NASA demos planned for Friday will go on. That story by Stephen Leto. Let's listen in.
It's just 21 days to the fresh election, and NASA leader Raila Odinga is not mincing words as the opposition escalates its war against the Electoral Commission.
He said nothing is agreed until it is totally agreed. There is no agreement between us and IEBC. As you know, we had presented to IEBC a very concise document outlining what went wrong and what we want to see rectified. Do not be cheated that NASA has some agreement with IEBC and that there is some progress that we are party to. We have no such agreement, and our faith in IEBC remains zero, which is why our political action plan must continue.
NASA faulting IEBC for allegedly disregarding its so-called 12 irreducible minimums conditions.
So therefore there is still a big gap between us and the IEBC. We told them to close that gap. They are still unable to close that gap. So don't say Jubilee is not complaining. Jubilee cannot complain. If you leave the ground as it was last time, that is what they want. So Jubilee is saying, we have come here, we will now come back on the 27th for the certificate. You see, we are not trying to take Jubilee to the altar so that we can go and then cheer that they have gotten married. We are not going to do that to Jubilee. So we will ask IEBC to do a soul searching. Please address yourself to specific issues raised in our document.
The irreducible minimums focusing on the ICT infrastructure, with NASA opposed to IEBC contracting French firm Otimofo to supply KIMS. It is also demanding information of the location of all servers, while also opposing the use of a cloud server. NASA has also demanded the GPS coordinates of all the KIMS gadgets. IEBC has insisted that the French firm will supply the ICT infrastructure. On results transmission, NASA is opposed to use of text messages to send results and wants Chebukati to announce the number of voters who will have cast their ballot when polls close at 5 p.m. IEBC has already indicated that text messages will now be transmitted simultaneously with scanned images of results forms. Despite IEBC yesterday saying it had reduced NASA's irreducible minimums after the closed-door meeting, Odinga appears dissatisfied and that IEBC had not cancelled the ballot printing tender to Dubai-based firm Al Ghurair.
Those protests shall therefore continue across the country every Monday and Friday in accordance with the law. It is self-evident that the police have been systematically and consistently trigger-happy against unarmed peaceful NASA supporters and have unleashed brutal force against innocent civilians, including young university students.
No reforms, no elections. We will not participate in an election that will be used to legitimize the presidency of Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta.
Raila Odinga is getting 100.
Yes, that's what NASA leader Raila Odinga had to say yesterday with regard to whether or not they've come to any agreement with IEBC. Clearly, there's no such agreement. Even on the front page of the Standard, on removal of top officials led by CEO Ezra Chiloba, IEBC says there's already a team working on that, so they do not see why removing Ezra Chiloba is necessary. Cancellation of the Al Ghurair tender for ballot printing. IEBC says it already has a 2-year framework contract with Al Ghurair, so that's not happening. New returning officers appointed from pool provided by political parties. That's what NASA wants. IEBC says returning officers have already been gazetted and undergoing training. Changes will interfere with poll preparations. Another demand, NASA wants independent experts to manage ICT. IEBC says They already have signed a 2.4 billion shilling deal with OT Morpho to reconfigure the KIMS kit. 20 days to the elections. Do you see any of this happening?
I think this should happen. For me, I think we must be sensitive to this country. We didn't want to see the economy collapse. It's already weak. We don't want to see people being killed in the streets because people are not sensitive.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to see tenders being cancelled, and everybody knows that when you give tender to a certain company for 2 years, of course, again, breaking that means a lot. And we don't have time really to do that at this particular time. I would also want to say that the issue of electoral commission is that we've given an institution a mandate to carry out election. You know, when we don't believe in our institution at one point, especially when the country is at critical moment, it's very difficult. For me, I think the NASA team or the leader of NASA has no good meaning for this country. I think he doesn't mean well for this country, because every time there's way to avert some of these things, he doesn't accept. You know, when you poke holes to an independent institution that is mandated to carry out election, then what are you saying? When you are asking the CEO, who is the person who is supposed to be who is an accounting officer for that particular institution, because if Shaleba is not there, then there's no accounting officer. Then what does that mean? That means that we'll not have election. We've talked about election date, and I think we moved it again. I think on the side of the Jubilee, I think there's a bit of willingness to do this. There's goodwill, and I'm happy that at least even they've gone to an extent where they even want the laws to be amended so that at least we can have some of these things
But
cleared.
that is also being read the other way by the other side, that probably that's lack of goodwill.
No, I think it's not really very easy to have a government that is willing to support. And for me, I think that willingness again shows commitment to this particular election. So for me, what I would say is that some of the things that they want done is administrative, which can be done after election. We have 20 days. We cannot say that we'll go to street, continue demonstrating, continue causing chaos, and then we have 20 days to go. When do we give time to electoral commission to prepare?
Yes, 20 days to the repeat presidential election. Do we have to do all these things that NASA demands? Do we still have to change all these laws that Jubilee wants to change? 20 days to the election. We'll continue this discussion after the break.